Hello, hello, my happy quilters. Here we are again with the Marcia and Joy Quilt Along.
Right.
This is number 5.
And we're in the final miles.
We
aren't
are. We might have a little sneak peek at the end, mightn't we?
We mightn't.
Alrighty. So we started this and we are using this book. Go back to number 1 for all the information on this book. But we love this book because each quilt block, and there's 110 of them in here, so the sky's the limit is what you can do, but each quilt block is done in 5 different sizes. So we have chose to do the 6-inch finish blocks. So today we're going to show you 2 more blocks, and the first one we're going to show you is the weather vane. So I'm going to show you how to put it together traditionally as it is in the book. So let's go down and take a peek at the weather vane block. So here it is. I've got so many pieces. Now, I will tell you, this is a little bit more challenging. It's not that hard. Again, we're doing half square triangles and squares. A lot of squares in this one. So even these pieces, though you could cut them the other way, this is all squares. This would be a fun one too. I thought this was fun for a directional fabric to make a little different kind of design in it. When you're just making one block, you can play with things like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to cut this size square. I'm not going to give you the measurements because they're all in the book. And then, of course, we cut on the diagonal of these to make these units. And we do the same thing with the other square. I don't know where that one is, but yes, we make these units. And then we also make some half square triangles with these, which are here and here. So a lot of units in this one, and then a lot of squares. A lot of these here are the squares that go in the corners and here and here. And these are the ones that go here and here and here. I will tell you, when you're making this block with traditional cutting, it's really important for you to be accurate with your cutting. I'm kind of a stacker. I like to stack my fabrics up and cut them. When you're cutting small pieces like this, the stacks have a tendency, especially when they're smaller, to kind of go downhill. So I will tell you, I started this one and I threw it away and started over and was much, much, much more careful about cutting my squares and making sure the angles were from corner to corner. This one isn't hard to make. It does take a little concentration. So for me, what I did was I laid in, if I was making a bunch of these blocks, I would lay out the first one and then sew it and then keep this for the example as I sewed the rest of them. So Joy is going to show you now how to cut these with a ruler and how to put a block like this together.
All right, so the weather vane is a very interesting block. And as Marcia said, there's lots of pieces because it's a 6 grid. And each one of these sections, because we're making 6-inch blocks, each section finishes to 1 inch, hence the smaller pieces. However, you have been making blocks with squares and half square triangles for weeks now, haven't they, Marcia?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there's nothing new in the sewing or cutting technique, really. But I'm going to give you 2 rules again. When you look at a block like this and the half square triangles next to a square, there's 2 ways to figure out what size to cut. Now, of course, your book is written using a traditional ruler. So usually there's a 3/8 added. So for example,
3/8 or 7/8, whatever. It's
right,
something in
it's
an
something,
eighth.
something in an eighth. So let's imagine that this square says to cut it 5 3/8. Now clearly our square is 6 inches, so this is not the right measurement. Do not cut that. But let's say the square says cut 5 3/8. Subtract 3/8, and this is the size that you're going to cut your strip for the half square triangle. Imagine you just saved yourself 3/8 of fabric. You got a lot more mileage out of that fabric. But in this case, the half square triangles are all cut from strips the same size as the square. The other thing is, you could also, if you didn't know what size or you wanted to make your own block, say the square is 2 inches. If you simply add a 1/2 inch to that, because it finishes to 2, you need that seam allowance for your square. The strips are cut the same size. So what I did in these little pieces again, and we've demonstrated this on last week's video again, I stacked my 2 strips. I don't stack more than that for these little pieces, but I stacked my colored strip and my light strip together, and I cut them using my half square triangle ruler. Go back and watch the last week's video for instructions here. But what I want to talk about is construction, because there's a few different ways you can put this together. You could decide to sew these together in rows if you wished. That isn't how I did mine. I'm not sure how Marcia approached it.
I did them like a 9 patch.
I did it too,
Yep.
as well. So we made basically these 4 patches, because these really are 4 sections in each one. And then, like we described last week, I laid mine out and I sewed these 2 pieces together, these 2, these 2, these 2, these 2, and I left that thread pin between, and then I finished up by adding the end, and then I could flip them down and flip them up. But what is really cool about this pattern is we each have perceived, can I have your block, Marcia?
Sure, absolutely. Let's put them together. Yep.
I kind of think they look like a flower, so depending on how you lay out your colors in this block, and that's why the book gives you this really beautiful little grid. You could color this up. This could look like a sunflower, or it could look like a weather vane. It could
These
look.
don't even look the same, do they?
They don't look like the same blocks, and I had to look twice to make sure we were talking about the same block today. So this is weather vane. It's block number 106 in your book. Not hard, but more pieces. But we wanted to up-level you just a little bit on that one.
And once again, we didn't press these until we had them all together.
We did not, and that makes a huge difference in your finish.
Right.
All right, let's talk about the next one. This one's Dutchman's Puzzle, it's called. And this one is going to be in your book. Let me turn my page over here. It's number 32 in your book. And
This is fun.
it is fun. So let's take a closer look, probably,
Yep,
Marcia.
let's look down here. So Dutchman's Puzzle, so a pinwheel in a pinwheel. This is, they would call this a flying goose block. So it would contain the goose in the sky put together. So we just make 8 of those, which was really quite easy. Once again, cut the squares for these big ones. Now these we cut in 4s.
Why don't you put the brown ones on top of the green so they can see the color
Yes.
contrast? Hence quarter square triangle, right, Marcia? Because you're cutting.
That's right. So these, when you cut this one, you're going to cut diagonal twice. So a bigger square, and that's what makes the goose. And on these squares here, once again, we're cutting half square triangles that go on each side of these guys. And then you simply put them together. But here again, I wanted to use a directional fabric. See how fun that is? How it just kind of goes around
really
in a circle.
neat movement.
So easy peasy. Really, this was an easy one to do. Just make sure of the placement that you always, these are all the same. Just make sure whatever color, like for me, the blue is on the top every time.
And that is a great way to point it out, that the making sure your outside one is on the top helps you get
When
the
you sew 'em
pinwheel right.
together,
Because I
right.
always lay it out and hope the pinwheel comes out right. But that is actually a better suggestion to make sure your one color, whatever it is
On the top
is
when
on
you
the
sew them together.
Right. Wow. Okay.
Okay, sneak peek time.
Sneak peek time. So we will have a finishing idea for you, and this was my test. But in here I have my Dutchman's Puzzle, and I'm not going to talk about what's surrounding it. And I just really think it's fun that this simple little flying goose creates this neat secondary design, and it looks like a fun pinwheel with other stuff going on. But what I want to talk about is the specialty rulers, because the last few times we've only used squares and the half square triangle. Now when the pattern says you have to cut that square across the diagonal twice, you need to change your ruler. You need to come into the quarter square triangle ruler. But what is really cool about these rulers is that this one and the half square, they're best buddies. Because whatever size you cut your strip for your sky pieces, and let's remind you that the sky pieces are the outside half square triangle rulers. So whatever size the strip is cut for here, it's the same size you cut for this huge ruler. But you can see it takes up more space on the block. And so let's take a closer look here because I want to just lay that out. So for my goose piece, you're only going to do a single layer, and this one has a notch. Let me slide that over.
A blunt tip.
It has a blunt tip. Thank you very much. It has a blunt tip. It needs to line up at the top of your strip, and then make sure when you lay it out that your angle, you can trim off a little bit. The other side should be even, and when I cut this, it would be that shape and this shape. And I need 4 of these, and I'm not going to cut all 4 for you on camera, but what I want to show you is I took this ruler and I simply rotated it around, and now this time we have 3 areas that are going to line up. You're going to line up here, here, and this point. And I'm not going to cut this on camera because it would be awkward. Right. But I'm going to go ahead and I would cut here, and I would do that 4 times, so I have 4 of these geese units. And then the sky pieces, I want to talk about sewing these on. You want to have a process when you sew these so that your geese all look the same. So you're going to take a sky, and it kind of is like a letter K, or up the mountain, down the mountain, right? And you're going to fold that over. You're going to sew from tip to tip. Now on a flying goose, absolutely important, finger press, because otherwise this piece is going to stretch out terribly and it's not going to line up. So you'll finger press that open, and then when you sew this one on, you can do it 2 ways, but my favorite way is after I've aligned it, I actually flip mine over, and when I sew from the back side. That way I can make sure everything is lined up here, because if this shifts even a little bit, you end up with a skinny point up here.
The points don't match up. You know, you have one tall and one short.
Right, and then let's take a closer, an up top look here. Yes, so they end up skewed, and you don't have your 1/4 inch seam allowance here, and then you have your goose is nipped off a little bit. So here's the thing. When you go to sew these together after you have created all your geese and you layer them, make sure whoever the point is, like in this case, it's this point, make sure that one is on top when you sew these 2 together, because as you approach the center, now I want to remind you, accuracy actually happens not at the needle, it happens out front, because as you're approaching, you need to make those adjustments just like you do when driving. Because if you wait to drive and correct at the corner at the critical moment, it's not going to come out the way you hope.
You've already passed this intersection.
You've already passed that intersection. Thanks, Marcia. But keep an eye. You want your needle to pierce the fabric just on the outside of that thread where these 2 pieces match, so that when you press them in the final press, you'll have room for that thread and all that fabric to sit and lay, and then you'll get a nice crisp point when you put them together. And then after you have your units put together, as Marcia pointed out, make sure your color that you've decided is on the outside is always on top. It's going to rotate, and then you sew this together just like a 4-patch. This square to this square, this square to this square, flip them over. And actually in the middle here, your pieces should alternate so that they lay flat. And that's Dutch men's puzzle. Now I didn't tell you how to cut it, but what you're going to look at is, since there's no squares to look at, you're going to have to subtract the 3/8 inch for your strip size. Look to your half square triangle for your clue.
There's no squares in this one. Yeah.
Because there are no squares, so that's your clue, the rule of 3/8. All right, Marcia, I think, we didn't show the bonus.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, this I absolutely love.
4 of them together for a fun little different table topper. Now I made this, I had some fat quarters at home, so I made this with fat quarters, so I didn't have enough of this to do this too. But does it really matter that they don't match?
I didn't even notice that they didn't match.
And so then this too is not the same as this. But you can do a lot of different things with your fat quarters too. So here we have another fun example of what you can do.
We do. So I think that wraps it up for
I think so. So next time it's 11 and 12 we'll be talking about. And then I think we have a separate one for the finishing.
Yes, we do.
So in 2 weeks, we'll join you right back here again at Pine Needles Quilt and Sew in Rochester for blocks 11 and 12, the last 2 of our blocks. And then after that, we'll do the finishing for you. So thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.